Welcome to POP Podcast. Today, we're looking at something pretty major. You brought us this piece from CBC News, April 21st, 2025, covering the passing of Pope Francis at 88.
Indeed. A really significant moment globally.
Absolutely. So we want to spend some time unpacking his, 12 years as Pope, looking at what really defined that time and, what his passing might mean for the Catholic Church and even beyond.
There's certainly a lot to discuss. His papacy was full of noteworthy events and shifts.
Okay, let's get into it. The article starts with the formal announcement. Cardinal Kevin Farrell on Vatican TV Monday morning, 7:35 a.m.
Yes, a solemn moment marking the end of an era that began, well, quite unexpectedly back in 2013.
Right, because Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected March 13th, 2013, but only after Pope Benedict XVI resigned. That itself was kind of earth-shattering, wasn't it? Popes don't usually just resign.
It was incredibly rare. Historic, really. Benedict's decision opened the door for something completely different, and Bergoglio's election certainly delivered that. Well, think about the firsts. He was the first pope ever from Latin America. The first Jesuit pope. That's a big deal in itself. The Jesuits have a very distinct history and focus.
Okay.
And he was the first to choose the name Francis. That immediately signaled something, evoking St. Francis of Assisi, poverty, humility, rebuilding the church.
So right from the name, it suggested a different direction. And being from Latin America, that must have shaped his outlook immensely.
Undoubtedly. It brought a perspective from the global south, a focus on inequality, maybe a different view on historical issues like colonialism, right to the heart of the Vatican.
Which brings us to one of those really difficult historical issues. The article highlights his apology in Canada, spring 2022. He called the church members' conduct in residential schools deplorable.
Yes, and crucially, later acknowledged it as cultural genocide.
That word genocide coming from the Pope, that must have been incredibly powerful, especially for indigenous communities.
It was a landmark moment. Acknowledging that level of harm and wrongdoing, it was something many had sought for decades, a necessary though painful step towards reconciliation.
And that connects maybe to his background. The article mentions his sort of ordinary beginnings in Buenos Aires, working in the family grocery store, loving soccer, the tango.
Exactly. That common touch seemed genuine. It wasn't the image many had of a pope, this sense of having lived a more, grounded life before his calling.
It definitely made him seem more relatable to a lot of people, I think.
It certainly seemed to, and it perhaps informed his priorities as pope.
Yeah, the article suggests he was maybe less concerned with rigidly enforcing every bit of doctrine compared to his predecessors, more focused on outreach.
It seems fair. More focused on those on the margins, people who felt excluded or judged by the church. His vision was famously a poor church for the poor.
And he lived that, didn't he? Choosing the Vatican guest house, the Santa Marta, instead of the Apostolic Palace.
That was a huge symbolic act right at the beginning. It sent a clear message about rejecting pomp and focusing on simplicity and service. It wasn't just talk.
And other traditions he changed. The foot washing ceremony on Holy Thursday.
Right. Moving it out of the traditional Vatican setting, often into prisons or refugee centers, and including women, even non-Christians, in the ritual.
That must have caused ripples.
Oh, it did. It challenged centuries of tradition, emphasizing service to all, not just a select group within a specific liturgical context. It was about the message of humility and outreach.
Speaking of outreach and challenging norms, his comments on social issues often made headlines. That "who am I to judge" line back in 2013 regarding gay individuals.
That was a seismic shift in tone. It didn't change doctrine, but the way he spoke about it, the openness, it was starkly different.
And he followed up later calling laws that criminalize homosexuality unjust.
Yes, consistently signaling a more merciful and less condemnatory approach, which led eventually to that controversial decision in December 2023.
Authorizing blessings.
Informal blessings, yes, for couples in irregular situations, which included same-sex couples, though significantly, with that exception requested by African bishops.
Right, which shows the internal tensions, doesn't it? Not everyone in the church was on the same page.
Absolutely. It highlighted the diversity of views and cultural contexts within the global Catholic Church. He was navigating very complex terrain there.
And his focus wasn't just on internal church matters. He was very vocal on things like refugees.
Very much so. A constant theme.
And climate change. That encyclical, Laudato Si, in 2015, that felt like a game changer.
It really was. A pope dedicating such a major teaching document entirely to the environment, calling for urgent action on climate change, linking it to poverty and justice. It pushed the conversation forward, far beyond just Catholic circles.
You mentioned encyclicals are major teaching documents.
Yes, they carry significant weight. Laudato Si's framed climate change as a moral and ethical issue, rooted in care for creation and the poor. And he followed it up later with Laudate Deum, reinforcing the urgency.
Okay, so we've talked about apologies for residential schools in Canada. The article also notes other apologies related to colonialism seizing indigenous lands elsewhere.
Yes, he made efforts to confront the Church's historical role in colonialism more broadly. Again, steps towards acknowledging past wrongs, though the implementation and follow-through are always complex issues.
And then his engagement with current conflicts, Gaza, Ukraine. He called for a ceasefire in Gaza.
He did, but then came those comments about Ukraine having the courage of the white flag.
Yeah, that caused a huge stir. The Vatican had to clarify it, didn't they?
He did. They explained he meant the courage to negotiate, not surrender. But it showed how difficult it is for a pope to weigh in on geopolitics without words being, well, intensely scrutinized and sometimes misinterpreted.
Definitely a fine line to walk. And of course, the issue that has plagued the church for decades, the sexual abuse scandals.
An unavoidable and tragic part of the Church's recent history and his papacy.
The article mentions he created the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors.
He did establish that body. But there's been persistent criticism, hasn't there, about its actual effectiveness, about whether bishops and others fully cooperated, about transparency.
It sounds like progress was made, but maybe not enough for many survivors and advocates.
That's a fair assessment. It remains a deeply painful issue and a major challenge for the institution's credibility. Finding true justice and healing is an ongoing struggle.
And amidst all this, his own stance on some issues remained quite traditional, like abortion. He used very strong language, comparing it to hiring a hitman.
Yes, his opposition to abortion was unwavering, aligning with long-standing church teaching, even while he adopted more, let's say, pastorally open approaches on other social issues. It shows the complexity. He wasn't simply liberal or conservative across the board.
That's a good point. Now, what about changes within the church structure, particularly regarding women?
He did make some notable moves there, appointing women to more senior roles within the Vatican Curia than ever before, and granting voting rights to women, lay women, and religious sisters at that major global gathering, the Synod on Synodality. That was a first.
So giving women more of a voice, more influence.
Exactly. He also formally changed church law to allow women to serve in roles like lector and acolyte during Mass, roles previously reserved for men. However,
he maintained the opposition to female ordination.
Correct. So, steps towards greater inclusion and recognition of women's roles, but within the existing doctrinal framework regarding the priesthood. Incremental changes, you could say.
And these changes, his overall direction, it didn't sit well with everyone inside the church, did it?
Not at all. The article mentions how he rankled arch-conservative clergy. There was definite pushback.
It even cites that critical memo attributed to the late Cardinal George Pell, using terms like neo-Marxist jargon. That's strong language.
It gives you a sense of the deep divisions his papacy sometimes exposed or exacerbated. Some felt he was compromising too much with modernity, diluting tradition.
Interesting. And his papacy, it actually lasted quite a while, longer than he seemed to expect initially.
He sometimes hinted he thought it might be shorter. But 12 years allowed him to really embed some of his changes and appointments.
Though his health was clearly declining in recent years. Lung issues from his youth, colon surgery, hernia repair, those bouts of bronchitis or respiratory problems.
Yes, his frailty became more apparent. It's a reminder of the immense physical and mental demands of the papacy, especially at his age.
So now, the conclave. The cardinals gather to elect the next pope.
That's the next major step for the church.
And the article points out something fascinating. About 73% of the cardinals who will vote were appointed by Francis himself.
That's a very high percentage. It suggests his appointees will significantly shape the election.
So does that mean his successor will likely continue his path?
You might think so, but it's never that simple. Conclaves can be unpredictable. Cardinals, appointed by one pope, don't always vote for a clone. They'll be assessing the church's needs now. So, while Francis's legacy looms large, the outcome is still quite uncertain.
Okay, so it's not a foregone conclusion.
Not at all.
Yeah.
There will be many factors at play.
But this idea the article ends with, that maybe his greatest legacy is being the first global pope, shifting the church's focus away from just Europe towards Latin America, Africa, Asia.
That's a really powerful thought. He undeniably broadened the church's perspective, brought voices from the periphery closer to the center. That shift in emphasis, that more global sensibility, that might be one of his most enduring impacts.
So, wrapping this up, it's clear Pope Francis's papacy was, well, transformative in many ways. These big efforts to update the church's approach, that emphasis on compassion, grappling with history.
He definitely wasn't a pope who shied away from difficult conversations or challenging the status quo. Lots of firsts, lots of moments that sparked both praise and, as we've discussed, significant friction.
And the big question hangs there. What sticks? What parts of his vision, his changes will endure? How will the church move forward now? Hopefully, this deep dive into the CBC article gives everyone listening a better handle on the context.
Understanding his 12 years is pretty crucial for thinking about what comes next.
Absolutely. And hey, if you found this deep dive helpful and want more analyses like this, please do consider liking and subscribing to POP Podcast. It really helps us keep these conversations going.
Your support is much appreciated.
We really hope this gave you a clearer picture of Pope Francis's impact. For anyone wanting to dig deeper, maybe look into the specifics of how Laudato Si's has actually influenced environmental policy or the ongoing efforts around the abuse crisis. There's so much more there.
Definitely fertile ground for further exploration.
And as we finish, I keep coming back to that first global pope idea. What does that mean long term? For a truly ancient institution like the Catholic Church to have its center of gravity feel like it's shifting, that's definitely something worth pondering.
A profound question indeed.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another topic right here on POP Podcast. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe.